cotton was planted on May the 8th. And that was actually kind of a very narrow planting window that we did have in early May, where we were able to get in the field before the May rains came and it became too wet for many producers to plant. So while we were able to plant, it became very concerning that soil temperatures remained very cool. We had soil temperatures that were in the 50s, especially under this cover crop. The cover crop acted as a blanket and kept the soil very cold. And then we also had extended periods of very rainy weather. Initially, we saw a delay in germination and emergence of the cotton in our cover crop, but our cotton that was actually planted under just the corn residue strip-tilled actually emerged more quickly. However, we had very chlorotic seedlings, and we started to see lots of cotton seedling diseases, including Pythium within the root, and we really had questions about the survivability of the cotton crop as a whole. We really saw the cotton that was in the wheat residue take off and progress much more rapidly. And while the crop is actually starting to meet with regards to its developmental stages, we are still seeing that the cotton where we had the wheat cover crop is slightly more advanced developmentally. Where we have the wheat cover crop, we're looking at plants that are anywhere from 11 to 12 nodes. We are starting to develop fruiting sites that are actually on the second position. And our first position fruiting sites, we're actually reaching that midpoint stage. We're actually starting to see where that bloom is going to develop. And then of course our second position, we are actually starting to reach match head on those second position fruits. So we're actually seeing where we had the residue that's still staying slightly ahead of where we did not have the wheat cover residue. So while in most years, even having the strip-till corn, the value from the residue of the strip-till corn would be very important for the crop establishment, we're still seeing that this is more delayed. On average, we're seeing that we have about 10 nodes where we have just the strip-till corn. And while we are starting to put on some second position squares, we're actually seeing that our first position is not as far along on most of our plants as in the plots where we have our wheat cover crop. And so the first position is closer to match head and not reaching that midpoint stage that we have in the other. And then our second position is either pinhead or just a little farther. So while we've discussed visual differences in the field today, we are also monitoring physical changes in the field. We want to evaluate these changes not just this year, but as we move forward over the next 3 years. We want to capture the different aspects of the crop rotation, both the corn phase as well as the cotton phase. And we also want to capture how the environment and differences between years affect the cover crop and what we see between the cover crop. Many producers have asked, would we still see the successful stand establishment of the cotton crop that we've seen this year in what would be considered a normal year, a year where we did not have very cool and wet May conditions? And so that's a very good question. And so as we move forward, those are things that we want to see. In-season measurements that we are taking will include soil moisture throughout the season. We are also taking soil samples for soil chemical properties, including soil organic carbon and soil organic matter, because we do want to see how several years of incorporation of a cover crop does change the soil organic matter, and if we see that in this region and these soils and environmental conditions. And then of course, ultimately we'll be looking at the yield components. We'll be looking at lint production as well as the quality of the cotton, and see if we actually see a benefit to that. And we'll also be working with an economist to look at the economic analysis of the cover crop.